What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go. What is going on, everybody? We had the Cool Guy Bowl tonight. Kevin O'Connell taking on Sean McVay. And the Rams are back, mainly because they got two of their better players. You could argue Puka at this time, besides Stafford, is their second best player, and they win. And Stafford dominates. And the Rams, look like a problem. So we'll dive into the Rams. I wrote down their next three games. I mean, watch out. You're going to look up here in the middle of November, and they could be like 6-4. Same thing happened last year. Stafford was brilliant. Puka is so we'll dive into it all. Obviously, Minnesota tonight was tough. It gets back to last week, right? You beat the Lions. You can lose on the short week on the road. But to lose this game, coming off the game they just lost, and obviously losing their star left tackle, that is that's, you could argue, depending on how serious that injury is, even way worse than the loss. But we'll dive into them. Jerry Jones is and the Cowboys making headlines with these fan tours. The Giants brass get a vote of confidence, and obviously it's Fugazi Friday. And when Joel Embid is going to load manage game one of the NBA season, that might take the cake. But before we dive into sports, why don't I tell you about some more sports? I was watching tonight SoFi. I've been there one time. I do believe, Jerry's World is cool. I think SoFi Stadium is the coolest stadium I've ever been to. It's obviously the most modern. If you ever get the chance to go there for a game, obviously, Rams games are basically, or Charger games are like pseudo away games sometimes. They host so many events there, from concerts to WrestleManias to you name it. If you ever get the chance, I cannot recommend them enough. And luckily, I have a sponsor. They go by Game Time. They're the official ticketing app of this podcast. You want to go to a concert, you want to go to any other game, anywhere, I got you covered. So you guys know the drill. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app. Create an account and use the code JOHN for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code JOHN for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. I wanted to start with Stafford because it really hit me tonight watching him play. He is so damn good at 36. It really is stupid. And for the overwhelming majority of his career, he obviously was on the Detroit Lions, who in no world reflect the current version of the Lions. They were arguably the worst franchise in the league and consistently right up there with one of the worst franchises in the league. Now, he had a couple good teams, but for the most part, he played on a dysfunctional and mainly irrelevant team. And there was one player consistently in the league who always was a big supporter of Matt, and it was Rodgers when he was on the Packers, because obviously Rodgers played him twice a year. But when you play someone, or when you're in a division with someone, because you play the other two opponents so often as well, you see the guy on cross tape so often when you're studying the other defense. And he was always such a, I don't think people realize how good this guy is. And I think the sad part about Stafford's career, and luckily we've got to see him with an elite coach. He won a Super Bowl, and he's got to play for playoff teams, right, twice so far with the Rams. And it's been awesome to watch him in these big games, in these meaningful games. But can you imagine if he would have been able to play for the Pete Carroll Seahawks, or somehow been on the Steelers or the Ravens, or just a well-run franchise, the way we would talk about this player? I'm not saying we would say he's one of the greatest players of all time, but I think we would easily talk about him, without hesitation, as one of the best players of his generation, and a no doubt about it Hall of Famer. Now, his story is yet to be written, but this is a guy, and you see him tonight, at 36 years old. The guy we're watching tonight at 36 years old Imagine all the games that most of us never watched in his 20s. Now, as you age as a quarterback, he's smarter than ever, right? And he still is a guy who is mistake prone. I would say his game is essentially the poor man's Brett Favre. And it's honestly closer to Favre than it is like being the divided by two version. But in terms of mobility, toughness, pocket awareness, ability to make every single throw, and occasionally can throw a pick, like tonight. They come out of halftime. It's tied 14-14. He's driving them right down the field, and he throws a horrendous interception that is not even the close. And that's the thing with Stafford. He can have a play like that. You're like, where did that come from? That looks like something Deshaun Watson or Bryce Young or whoever the worst quarterbacks in the league, that's the throw they would make. Then he comes back on the next drive and misses Tutu Atwell down the sideline. It's like, that's a touchdown. And he knew it too. And then bing, bang, boom, couple more drives, couple more touchdowns, game over. And throughout the game, he is just dominating. He's a fun player to watch. But I think for as fun as this Rams run has been, and I know there's been a little talk about him being traded, he's not going to get traded, mainly because you see how good this offense is. I don't know when they get their two best wide receivers back. Also, Cooper Kupp. You watch him play, and I know he's coming back off injury. He's not the same player as he once was. The gap between him and Puka, and this is no knock on Cooper. I mean, Puka, when healthy, because he's been a little out of sight, out of mind, I kind of forgotten. Like, obviously, you know he's a really good player, the numbers he put up last year, but you're watching him tonight, you're like, holy shit, this guy's one of the best wide receivers in the league. You talk about, short and intermediate game, he could dominate over the middle of the field. The outs, the slants, the quick ins, and then he can work the sideline. He's such a physical blocker. I mean, he's just a complete player. The one knock on him is like, in terms of quote unquote superstar, I wouldn't put him like there with Jamar Jefferson, or I almost combined Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, but those two guys. But he is damn good. So you add him, you add Cooper Kupp, it spreads out their entire offense, which lets other guys eat because they're focusing on those guys. Also opens up the running game where they can't just stack the box because Matt Stafford's throwing to nobody. So Williams is eating, and I almost runs for 100 yards. I'm a huge Blake Corum fan. Like, that offense is legit when they're fully healthy. And this team's pretty damn good because they built this young nucleus on defense. But it all gets back to Stafford. Because when you can ride a guy at 36 years old who is that good, and listen, this is not the NBA where in the middle of his Detroit Lions career, quarterbacks, usually if you're a really good player, he was the number one overall pick, you just kind of get stuck. Now you get paid handsomely for it. I looked. He made $219 million for the Detroit Lions. So while his career underachieved because of the organization, his bank account surely did not. But the best thing that ever happened to this man was to get traded to Sean McVay and the LA Rams, because he's not just on a real team. Now, the Lions are as well now, but, I mean, they just made the NFC Championship game for the first time in 30 years. And this Rams team, if they can stay healthy, like Cooper Kupp's not getting traded. Why? Because his value isn't that high. I don't really think he has much trade value. Again, he's still a productive, solid, strong starter. Like tonight, he had 5 catches, 51 yards. Obviously, the last catch when he got shoved out of bounds was not ideal, but he made a huge catch on the series before on third down to basically, put the pseudo nail in the coffin. And everyone's going to be like, John, what about the face mask at the end of the game? I'm sorry. I had bad no call, should have been called, but I don't feel that much sympathy. I don't have that much faith. We'll get into the big injury for Minnesota that they were going to be able to drive down the field, but I get being a little angry. But ultimately, they were pinned up against the right team won this game. I'm with you. Bad call. But tonight, to me, was about Matt Stafford. I mean, what a great chess match between Sean McVay and Brian Flores. The way that he was moving guys around. They used bunch formations to get guys open. McVay sometimes, when these guys are all playing, like, McVay's got a little Andy Reid to him. I know he's considered a Shanahan guy, and even Gruden, I would say, is, likes to run the ball. McVay really wants to go 4-5 wide, get Stafford in the shotgun, and sling that pill around. And tonight he hammered the run and he stuck with it tonight, and it was very, very effective. Offensively, they look fantastic. Now it's a tough spot for Minnesota, coming off a tough loss, short week across. That's a long ass flight, and this gets back to last week where before I get off the Rams though, this is why coaching is so important. You lose Nacua, who hadn't played. Cooper Kupp gets injured pretty immediately, and you're able to just keep your head above water. 2-4 is not ideal, but your season's kind of over if you're 1-5, right? And that's where obviously they beat the Raiders last week. But to me, it was that Niner win is huge because now they're 3-4. They get this mini bye. They go to Seattle, who they're very comfortable playing, and actually I think they match up pretty well against. Then they play the Dolphins, and then they play the Patriots in New England. So even if I'm being conservative, you're looking at a team, if they stay healthy, worst case scenario, they're 5-5. I mean, there's a chance they're 6-4. And all these guys literally just did this, right? Last year when they were 3-6, and then heading into the playoffs, they were one of the hottest teams in the league. And the other thing is adding Jared Verse to this defense, which was already really solid. Like, it's very rare pass rushers. I think people get very concerned, like with the Puka Nacua types, not super fast. Or you're going to struggle to get open. And then you just know immediately, you're like, well, it translates his play speed, his route running, his ball skills, his toughness. Like, you knew right away last year, like, Puka's a player. But those type guys make teams a little nervous, right? Because they're more dependent on things that aren't speed. But if you can get open, you get open. It's no different with pass rushers who are power guys first, right? A lot of teams lean, like, obviously you want your defensive linemen and your edge rushers to have power. But if you have elite quickness, elite speed, that usually translates better because it's just hard to touch you. And then ultimately you can use your power off that. Well, Verse is a power first guy. And sometimes those guys in college don't translate because it's hard to just shove dudes around in the NFL. Kind of reminds me of Khalil Mack. Some similarities there because early on in Khalil Mack's career, he did not have many pass rush moves. But you know what translated immediately? His power rush. And you saw tonight when Darrisaw went out and he got Quessenberry a couple times just one-on-one, he shoved the guy into the air. Now, that's a backup, but still he weighs 320 pounds. So Young, number 0, was a good player for him last year, a rookie, second-year guy. I mean, they got a lot of frisky players up front. Obviously, you lose Aaron Donald, which is huge. But in a weird way, like obviously non-quarterback, the star that Puka is, it kind of shifted, and then they play as a group on defense. So, I like the Rams coming into the season. Then they had so many injuries, it was hard to take them seriously. But Sean McVay somehow won that 49er game, and that could be a big difference at the end of the year. They're a 9 or 10 win team instead of like an 8-9 team. So tonight, fantastic performance by Stafford, and it's just fun to see him in games that matter. On the flip side, like, listen, I think Sam Darnold for the most part was really damn good. If JJ McCarthy over the next couple years looks as good as Sam Darnold has looked in 2024, I think most Vikings fans would go like 6 to midnight. They would die for him to be this good, this explosive. One, his pocket presence is really good. I mean, how often he steps up and climbs in the pocket, not to run. There was a throw tonight in the red zone where they had to settle for a field goal where he climbed the pocket. This is when Darrisaw was out, and he hit, who was it? It was Naylor. And I mean, he had to throw it probably a little harder than he wanted, but this is the big leagues. Like, you got to hit you in the chest and the hands, even if he's semi close. Like, you got to catch it. It was a fantastic play, but he was making a lot of throws over the middle of the field that looked exactly like Stafford, stepping up in the pocket, throwing ropes to Jefferson. Obviously, he hit Aaron Jones down the sideline on the one. He hit Jefferson on a couple down the sidelines as well. Like, I know he didn't get the chance on the last drive because they called the safety on the play that should have been a 15-yard penalty. And obviously on the drive before that, they got kind of punked in terms of their offensive line. He was a sitting duck. But I thought for the most part, 18 to 25, a couple touchdowns, didn't really put the ball in harm's way. Like he had for $10 million. We've been talking a lot about Derrick Henry and the value he's had for the Ravens, right? For whatever they paid him, a $7 million signing bonus and $8 or $9 million guaranteed. You can't, for a $10 million quote unquote bridge quarterback. I just don't think you can ask, like, this is as good as it gets. Honestly, this guy looks like a real NFL quarterback. And this guy's playing at such a high level. It's like, I know you drafted a guy really high, but the likelihood that he's going to be that good next year, and who knows? I mean, you never know. And I'm bullish on JJ McCarthy, but it's impossible to not be extremely. The quarterback play tonight, for the most part, beside the one Matt Stafford interception for a Thursday night game, was as good as you get. It really was. But obviously, the story of the night for the Vikings, you lose Darisaw. I mean, a big reason Trent Williams held out was because when Darisaw signed his massive contract, which I think pays like on average $28 million a year, which is well deserved, he's like, well, I got to get a little more than that because I'm the best left tackle. But you could make the argument that Darisaw definitely is the best young left tackle. There just is no replacing that guy. It's no different than a quarterback. Like Stafford goes down, you're just fucked. I mean, it's just period, point blank, end of story. It's just over, immediately. I think it's a lot like that with superstar tackles. And there's a short list of them. You see it with Darisaw. You saw it earlier this year when Lane Johnson missed a game and they went to the backup. The drop off is just so gigantic. You saw it in the Giants game against the Eagles. They lose their left tackle, and it's like a free-for-all for the Eagles in the backfield. So that guy's a star. And if he has a major knee injury, that's just a crippling blow. Now, I'm not acting like the Vikings won't win again, but I took them very seriously. Like in the first half of that game, I'm like, and I've thought this all season long, this is a team that can win a playoff game, right? This is a team, whether they win the division or a wild card team, like this is real. Super well coached, potent offensive weapons, running back, multiple wide receivers, good quarterback play, good offensive line. I don't think they have the most talent on defense, but they're super well coached. Obviously, Van Ginkel's a really good player. Their front just plays really hard. Their DBs, I mean, are relatively solid. Gilmore's older, but play well as a unit, try hard. But man, I think you're borderline screwed. I mean, if that were to be a season-ending injury, like I'm sorry, like I don't take you seriously at all anymore because there's no Band-Aid that fills that gap. And you saw it as the game went on, the pressure from the left just amplified dramatically. And luckily Darnold is a good athlete and he could move. But I mean, a huge part of their game is pushing the ball down the field because of Jefferson and Addison and just how good their wide receivers are and just how good their play caller is. But they showed Kevin O'Connell's face when Darisaw was laying on the ground and he tried to, act like a coach, unfazed, but inside he had to be crying. Because if I was him, I would have been in tears. But my overall takeaway from this game is I think Stafford, in a weird way, still underappreciated, and I think a huge reason is for his Lions tenure. And I think Sam Darnold has just been a revelation this season. He's been awesome. And that injury, obviously, beside winning, the Rams win, big story. They're healthy, but you lose Darisaw. That's going to be one of the biggest injuries of the season. Does your favorite NBA player have what it takes to be crowned king of the court? Find out at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. DraftKings is offering $1 million a day in bonus bets for the first 10 days of the NBA season. That's $10 million in bonus bets. Here's how to shoot your shot. Opt in and get a daily NBA Profit Boost token. Pick a pregame NBA player prop to boost. If that player leads the league that night in points, plus rebounds, plus assists, you win a share of $1 million in bonus bets. Download the DraftKings app and use code JOHN. That's code JOHN to win a share of $1 million in bonus bets if your player is king of the court. Only on DraftKings. Crown is yours. Okay, let's hit on a couple other things. There was a story that came out today on ESPN that was centered around the Cowboys and fan tours. Now, obviously, the Cowboys built this, monstrosity of a practice facility that they call the Star, which by all accounts is incredible. And Jerry, one of the great showmans, gives tours to the fans. And obviously, a lot of players, specifically Dak, were asked about it today. And before we get into Dak's comments, this whole, like, to me, this story comes from and is created by the shitstorm that Jerry has created. I feel like in these last couple of weeks, obviously his radio interviews, one, the thing that he did a couple of weeks ago, getting into it with the guys, which people argue like that's not that abnormal. It's how angry he was just being asked basic questions after an ass kicking. And then this week, essentially crushing the play calling and just destroying everything that it feels like that he's witnessing, like he's not the ultimate boss, to me has led to stories like this coming out. And when you just say a facility does a fan tour, my first reaction is like, who cares? That is not a big deal. I can't speak to how the Eagles operate now, but when I was there, you could be in the lunchroom and players could be eating and a dude from marketing could walk in and, people were just mingling around. We're all human beings. Obviously you're not like taking pictures with them, but it wasn't that abnormal to just walk by random people. Now, I think there's a difference of having people that work in the organization and just having random fans. Ed Werder today took a picture being sarcastic about the whole, kind of moment and topic and article. Where they do their press conferences, there's clearly open glass where you walk into the facility, and there was a fan tour going on. And there was a dude wearing a Cowboy jersey with his family holding his little girl waving at the media. It was incredible. It made me chuckle. But ultimately, they asked Dak about it, and he said that he thought it was stupid that anyone would make this an excuse. Like, you walk by random people, you say hello, and you keep on rolling. It does not distract or lead to losing. And I agree. Like, you're not playing bad defense because, Billy from Lubbock, Texas brought his family, brother, and good buddies on a Cowboy tour of the facility. Now, I do think it represents, like, the Cowboys just have a lot going on. And right now they have people pointing fingers, anonymous sources in the building, Jerry going on record, shitting on everybody, and they play on Sunday Night Football. And I do believe, and they might just be so undermanned. Now, the 49ers aren't exactly, playing with a full deck either, but that's the type game that if you lose, and especially lose handily, I would be stunned if it looked like last year where they just got blown out. But if they lose by double digits and get embarrassed on Sunday Night Football, the number one show in America, I do just think this team could crumble. Like, I just think they could fall apart. And I was wrong. I thought this would be a playoff team. Now, I didn't think they'd win 12 games again, but I thought the culture, the talent they still have, they have a good quarterback. Zimmer would be good with defense. I didn't know everyone would get injured, but they would win 9 or 10 games and be a wild card team. And honestly, compete for the division because I didn't think there was a team in the division that would run away with it numbers wise. Though the Eagles obviously have more talent. Didn't expect Washington to be this good. But regardless, like, you lose this game coming off a bye, especially if you get shoved around a little bit, which is going to be a problem because they can't stop the run. And Kyle Shanahan is kind of a throwback. I mean, he in a perfect world, he's like Jim Harbaugh. He would run the ball 80-90% of the time if he could on a given game. And when he gets the opportunity, he has no problem doing it. That it feels like this team and really this organization could just fall apart in the short term. I'm not saying the Cowboys are going under or whatever. Obviously, I mean, they make money hand over fist. I mean, they make more money than any team in the league. But I was like, I don't know, Al Davis 2.0. It does start to feel like it's becoming that a little bit. It's completely different. and it's more like a Fortune 500 company, Al Davis 2.0, because of how well the business is run and how big the product is. But in terms of the football team, in terms of the football stories, it does feel like they've jumped the shark, and it's getting really, really weird. And I've known a few very successful people, and as they got older, they usually don't change their ways, and they tend to be stubborn people. And I obviously don't know people of the wealth level of Jerry Jones, but I think they're all cut from the same cloth because you hold back and lean back and refuse to change because what you did 30, 40 years ago is the reason you're sitting here right now. And Jerry ain't going to change. Just like Al Davis in his latter years wasn't going to change. And when these guys have the amount of power they do, it's very unique. Like Jerry's the GM as well. Same with Al. And they own the team. Literally everyone that walks into the building, from player to coach to intern to marketing guy to the front office assistant to the janitor, knows that guy is the top of the food chain. And once they start getting weird, as Jerry is getting, it just feels like it's crumbled. It can crumble. And it might be crumbling in front of our eyes. But this notion that these tours in the building, like this is a story that's irrelevant if you're 5-2. Do you know when the story's irrelevant? The last 3 years when they had 12 wins. No one gave a shit about Billy from Austin and his family coming on a tour. You start losing, players start pointing the fingers, things get leaked. And a story like this, which many would argue is kind of a non-story, becomes a story. And there is no band-aiding or plugging these holes that are leaking and stopping this avalanche of just kind of negativity around, especially, and unlike Al Davis, Jerry's talking every week, multiple times a week. So it's only going to grow. It's not like if they lose on Sunday night to the Niners, what do you think Jerry's talking about on Tuesday? Like everything's going to be okay. We'll keep our heads high. We'll get this thing to get. No, he's going to keep doubling down. So I'm one of those people that have always I'm not a Jerry Jones hater. I've always admired, honestly, a story back from the way he bought the Cowboys, how quickly they turned around. I know it wasn't because of him, but like I grew up like it was the Niners versus the Cowboys, and they were as big as any team in my youth, and rightfully so. They were a powerhouse, led by him because he's got a big ego and he wanted everyone to know about it. And now it feels like in his early 80s, he hasn't just lost his fastball, but he's starting to create these messes. Like he's really becoming a part of this. And I don't know if it was just that moment last year against Green Bay really rattled them. Really, the last three losses, 3 years in a row in the playoffs have been really, really hard. You go back to 2021, they host the 49ers. They're a 6.5-point favorite. Niners took it to them. The following year, they end Tom Brady's career. Dak has one of the greatest games of his career. Then they go toe-to-toe with the Niners, and they lose that game because Dak throws a couple interceptions. Their defense was awesome. And then last year happened, which kind of feels like icing on the cake. Another thing that happened, speaking of the NFC East, is John Mara gave some comments at an event. And I think he's in a tough spot, right? Because I can't imagine he's happy. He has to hear constantly about the Saquon thing, and then it literally just happens at his home stadium. Rushes for $175. Then the video goes viral. That he's like, it's almost like he waved the white flag for the Giants. Like, yeah, I'm good. Let them be. Even though I doubt putting Saquon back in that situation would have been very risky for Nick Sirianni and his job status if he were to get injured, in a situation where you're killing someone just to rub it in their face like you already had. So luckily it just didn't happen. But I actually think it's worse just with the comments on the sideline of just like, yeah, well, I'm good, man. These guys aren't worth it to me. And John Mara essentially said this week that I do not anticipate any changes this offseason. And I think he wants, I've seen this for years with Mark Davis. Like Mark Davis would have done anything for Josh McDaniels to work out and it not to have gotten as bad as it got. Mark Davis would have paid millions of dollars for those emails on John Gruden to never come out. Just so John Gruden could have been his head coach, even if they just became like a fringe playoff team over the course of a couple years. For like 7, 8, 9 years. Some of these owners want no part of firing people and going back on a search. And I do believe that he's being truthful. He's essentially, I don't want to do this. I do not want to fire these guys. I do think it's pretty hard to shake everything that happened this summer on that television show. If I'm a Giants fan, I just have a hard time taking Joe Schoen seriously. That's one of the more jaw-dropping television shows I've ever seen when it comes to sports. Now, it's kind of a double-edged sword because as a consumer and as a lover of football and just loving that content, it might be some of the best content I've ever seen. I was glued. If you would have told me off-season New York Giants, how do you think it'll come out? I would have said 95% chance would be awful and boring. Instead, it was must-watch television if you liked, if you enjoy the NFL, if you enjoy, if you play fantasy football. It's like, how does GMs actually operate? You're like, this can't be true. And in my experience, that's not the way it happens. And those aren't the conversations and how willy-nilly, and it felt like they were just freelancing on the fly. But it's hard to shake that moment that we saw on TV where he said, I don't think I could sleep if he goes to the Eagles. And Joe Schoen not only said, hey, I don't think he's going to go to the Eagles, I think he's going to end up with the Giants, or excuse me, the Bears. Clearly, he wants to like Brian Daboll. He wants Brian Daboll to work. But what if it's just not going to work? Like, what if they just win one more game the rest of the season? Their offense is anemic. And now losing their left tackle, they are going to get their quarterback killed. And Brian Daboll, I think Daniel Jones came out today and said that Brian Daboll told him, you're a quarterback moving forward. Regardless, it doesn't even matter whoever you're throwing out. He stinks. He's not good enough. You throw Drew Lock in this situation, it's not going to look much better. It's a disaster. And you're just not going to be able to win many games when this is your situation. So I do believe John Mara, like right now, he's like, God, I just want them to show some life. But what if they don't? And what if all of a sudden we're drafting, instead of 6 next year, we're drafting 3rd? It's hard to feel great about rolling this back, but I do understand where he's coming from. I don't want to look at the guy like I'm also becoming Al Davis in the 2000s. I'm just firing people every 2 or 3 years. He went from 3 straight coaches. They lasted 2 years. And if he were to fire everybody, these his GM and head coach would have lasted 3 years. So in 9 years, he would be on his 5th head coach, post Tom Coughlin. Like, that's a lot to handle. So I think this Giants thing is worth monitoring and something that just a story that's not going to go away. Last but not least, because it's Fugazi Friday, I truly believe we saw one of the greatest FUs we've ever seen. Opening night for the NBA happened Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, right? First game of the season. Load management and guys sitting out is part of the sport. These teams no longer care about the paying customer. That they no longer care. We have seen that for years now. They will sit a guy if they just, whatever, just take the game off. Happens all the time. And honestly, throughout the regular season, if you're going to buy a ticket, at this point in time, that's on you. But Adam Silver, who you got to give him credit, somehow locked up a television deal, despite their ratings going the opposite way at almost triple the value. And one of his big partners, who has been one of his biggest partners and most loyal partner, who talks about his league constantly, as people DM me, why is there NBA Live in August when football's going on and basketball's months away? They're in business with him. And one of the biggest opening night games on national television is the Sixers at home hosting the Bucks. 2 of the best players in the NBA, Giannis and Joel Embid, guys that have won an MVP. Now, the difference is Giannis is a champion and a guy I would say universally respected. If you like sports, you go, that guy plays his ass off. That guy gives everything he's got. Then there's Joel Embiid, who has never come remotely close to winning anything. He's never even been to the conference finals. James Harden takes a lot of shit. Like James Harden, while he's underperformed relative to his regular season status, a little overrated, I think, because his style doesn't translate to the playoffs, has been to the conference finals a couple times when he was the alpha, let alone the finals when he was on Oklahoma City. Like he's had personal success and team success. Joel Embiid has 0 team success. Honestly, they have kind of been the laughingstock of all the good teams in the league over the last 6 or 7 years. To load manage game 1, I think it's easy to blame the Sixers. And listen, they deserve it. And if I'm Adam Silver, they gave me a middle finger. They essentially said, you're too big of a puss. I don't think you'll do anything, even though you've implemented new rules. Again, this isn't Christmas week or, early December or January and you're playing Orlando and no one's paying attention. No one cares. This is game 1. All around the league yesterday, I looked, guys are playing 25, 30, 35 minutes. Because unless you are the Boston Celtics who showed up and played their ass off the other night, this should be a big deal, even if you plan on load managing throughout the season. But Joel Embiid, who by all accounts and reports is fully healthy, sat out game 1. His team got bounced in the playoffs in the first round last season. So he didn't play the second round. He didn't play the third round. He didn't play, obviously, in the finals. He barely even played in the Olympics. So this is a guy who has not played forever. You would think against one of his quote-unquote equals or peers in Giannis on national TV, in the history of my life watching sports, obviously football's not even comparable to the NBA anymore because no one load manages and anyone plays if they can. But let's just use basketball. All the players I grew up on, we'll remove Michael Jordan. Just go the other guys that won MVPs over that period. The David Robinsons, the Charles Barkleys, the Kobe Bryants, the Shaqs, the Keems, you name it. The most famous people when I was a kid, like kind of that group beside Michael. Can you imagine them getting bounced in the first round and then them sitting out game 1 to load? It's the first at home. I think it's unprecedented territory. I really do. Other guys aren't playing, like Kawhi Leonard. Well, he gets knee surgery like every 6 months. Is it hard to tell if he's load managing or injured? Of course it is, because he misses a lot of games. But he clearly gets surgery all the time. Paul George, who also didn't play for the Sixers, got injured in the preseason. So, he legitimately hyperextended his knee. This guy, by all accounts, every NBA reporter, yeah, he's healthy. And now the NBA is investigating. If I was Adam Silver, the FU you just showed me, after I did everything humanly possible to get our league so much money about to flow in these next 10 years, that these players are going to be making $80, $90, $100 million. Guys like Joel Embiid, who currently makes $51 million. I mean, you talk about a Fugazi. The Sixers, the organization, is a joke. It really is. And that was, I thought, in the history of load management, probably the lowest moment for the NBA. And if I'm Adam Silver, I can't suspend anybody because I want this guy to play. I am throwing a historic fine at the organization, which hopefully just pisses the owner off and makes him get on the guys. And maybe the owner, now that he's in the NFL, doesn't even care. It's yeah, hit me up later in the season. I'm going to focus on my football team. But what a joke.